Welcome to the Inquirer. Today we have with us Professor Scott Kugle from the USA. He has done extensive research on Sufism and comparative religion. Let's see what he has to share with us on the Sufism. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
The one who is from the West and the one who has extensively done on the Sufism. What the Sufism to you, sir?
What is Sufism to me? Sufism is another word for Islamic mysticism, or mysticism in the Islamic tradition. So the important question is, what do we mean by mysticism? Mysticism is something that exists in every religious tradition. It's the part of that religious tradition, you could call it a substream of that religion, that involves people who want to experience the presence of God or the presence of a religious ideal personally and immediately. Not through some ritual, not through some temple, not through mediation by some priest or other official, but immediately and intuitively. So mysticism involves practices of meditation, understanding of religion as cultivating a religious experience. So in the Islamic tradition you have mystics that are trying to achieve this, just like in the Hindu tradition you have the Bhakti movement, people trying to achieve the same experience. In the Christian tradition you also have mystical orders, mystical communities that are organized. So Islamic mysticism is a part of the religious tradition of Islam, but has a distinct orientation or a distinct focus within the religion.
How do you see the influence of the Sufism on the Indian culture?
Sufis played a very big role in Indian culture, especially in the fields of poetry and music. Their contributions are very, very rich. And especially for people in India who are familiar with Urdu and Persian language, there's a very vast repertoire of poetry and music that was cultivated and written by Sufis. And I'm sure that that's true also in local languages like Punjabi up in the north, in Bengali over on the east side. I don't know so much about Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry and Kerala, but I'm sure there are also Sufi literature, poetry and music in these local South Indian languages as well.
So it's about Indian Sufism or the Eastern Sufism. Recently the Sufism is flourishing in the West also. What's your comment on it?
Well, wherever you find Muslims, you find Sufism. And this is a misconception that many Indians have, is they think, oh, Sufism is something that flourished in India, but that's particular to Indian culture. That's not true. In Iran, in Persia, you find Sufism. In Egypt and North Africa, you find Sufism. In Turkey, you find Sufism. In North America also, when Muslims began to travel to North America and settle there, you also found Sufis who moved with them. And many Sufis from India, Sri Lanka, picked up and moved to North America and began to teach there. And there are small communities here and there in North America of Sufi practitioners. Some from outside North America and some from North America who have joined Sufi communities and Sufi practices. Some of them convert to Islam in order to become Sufis, and some don't see the need to convert to Islam in order to practice Sufism.
Sufism is beyond the religion.
You could say, although it's very rooted in the Islamic tradition, Sufis draw off of the Quran to provide them inspiration and also meditation practices, and they draw off of the life of the Prophet Muhammad and his teachings in order to guide them. So you could say that Sufism is rooted in Islam, but not limited to Islam. That would be the best way to put it.
Talking about the Prophet Muhammad's life, some Muslims say that pointing out the life of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, that Sufism has nothing to do with Islam. What's your comment on it?
Those people are sadly mistaken. Although the word Sufi did not exist in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the practices that Sufis do did exist. We find examples of the Prophet teaching some of his companions means of meditation or techniques of meditation which are separate from namaz or salat, the ritual forms of prayer that all Muslims do. There are stories of him after making dawn prayer, sitting in meditation. There's also a story of the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, Hazrat Ali. And at one point, Hazrat Ali asked him for the most valuable thing that he had. And the Prophet Muhammad said, there are certain things you should do. Before you go to sleep, say Subhanallah walhamdulillah, which is glory be to God and thanks be to God. And say it 100 times before you sleep. That's the most valuable thing I have to give. So that Sufis see as the beginning of the Sufi practice of meditation, as an inner teaching of Islam, given by the Prophet Muhammad to his son-in-law, Ali. And from Ali, it was given to other companions, and from them it was given to another generation, until those teachers who took this wisdom tradition and these meditation practices started to adopt the name Sufi. We only find the first written record of somebody calling himself a Sufi about 100 to 150 years after the Prophet died.
Here in India, you have already mentioned the Bhakti movement. What do you see the relation between the Bhakti movement and the Sufism?
Bhaktis and Sufis are doing the same thing, but in slightly different languages. It's as if you're singing a love song in Tamil and comparing it to a love song in Hindi. Well, the Hindi love song would sound quite different than the Tamil love song. But when you look at what the meaning of the song is, they're both singing about love. So in the same way, Sufis and Bhaktis are mystical practitioners, one in a Hindu environment, the other in a Muslim environment. But when you really look at the content of what their rituals are, and their use of music and poetry, and the kind of ecstatic experiences or tranquility or a peace of mind that they're trying to achieve, you might say that they're doing the same thing.
As the age changed, the Sufis were considered to be the gods, or at least by some followers, someone who deserved to be worshipped. So, what's your comment on it?
I don't think that's the case. Sufi teachers don't desire to be worshipped, but they do desire to teach people. And so many of their followers, because they hear words of inspiration from a teacher, a Sufi master called a sheikh or a pir, they may understand that that inspiration comes from God, so my teacher is also like God. And that's a very common saying in India, that the guru is God. And so some Sufis in India also use this expression to talk about their reverence for their teacher. But to say that they worship a Sufi teacher like people worship God is a misunderstanding. And this is complicated, though, by the practice when a Sufi teacher dies, especially if it's a teacher who's considered a saint or a wali from the awliya. The awliya is the technical term for the friends of God, or the people who are saints, people who've given up their self-concern and have lived their life for God alone. When somebody like that dies, very often Sufi communities respect that tomb where the person is buried. And they don't believe the person is actually gone. Even though their body has died, their presence is still there. So people go to the tomb to visit that person. It's called ziyarat, to visit somebody. And to pay their respects, they bring gifts, flowers, incense. There are certain rituals that people do at a tomb. People pray over the tomb, they read Fatiha as a way of asking God to bless and protect the person who's buried there. And these are all very ancient Islamic practices, actually. The Prophet Muhammad used to go to graveyards to pray for the dead, to ask God's blessing for them. And the Quran actually talks about praying over the dead. So there are some contemporary Muslims who say, oh, you shouldn't go to tombs, you shouldn't go to graveyards, you shouldn't do rituals at tombs. But that's a modern, reformed interpretation of this practice. But because Sufis are going to the tombs of their leaders and people they consider saints, and often touching that tomb, as if you would touch the feet of your guru as a sign of respect. Some people say, oh, this is worshipping. They're worshipping the tomb like they're worshipping an idol. That's a misunderstanding. If you ask any of the people who are actually doing that, are you worshipping this person? They would say no. No.
So, what are the relevance of Sufism in this modern age, sir? What do you think?
I think the relevance of Sufism in the modern age is the same as the relevance of Sufism in the medieval age or in the age of the Prophet Muhammad. Sufism is a way for people to expand their consciousness in the world, to think of things other than just themselves and their own benefit. In the modern world, everybody's running after money and fame and fortune. Human beings 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago were doing the same thing, with not much difference. So Sufism tells you to be content with what you have, to not go greedily running after more, to be content with who you are, to not want to be somebody else, to know that God has put you where you are for a purpose, and it's your duty to find out that purpose and do it, selflessly and sincerely. That's no different now than it ever was.